From the moment the mate bond first hummed under my skin, I thought my future was set. Perfect. Undeniable. I, Helen Park, destined to be Luna to Lucas, the golden alpha heir of the Silverclaw clan. Our connection was a steady anchor, his presence a constant comfort, his scent of pine and cold steel. I never questioned it until the night I found him. Not with me, but with another on our bed. The lie I lived shattered, leaving only razor-sharp fragments of betrayal and a soul scorched by rage. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I simply turned and walked away, leaving behind the ghost of who I was, and stepping into the inferno of who I would become. My revenge wouldn't be tears, it would be the destruction of everything he cherished. And to do that, I had to align myself with his greatest enemy, Mark, the wild, untamed alpha heir of the Shadowfang Clan. The lie tasted like a dream, sweet as the wild honeysuckle draped over Blackwood Academy's old stone walls. It promised a future as bright and sharp as a commander's blade, tasted of crisp autumn air, and most of all of love. My fingers curled around the velvet box in my pocket. Inside, a single, intricately crafted silver wolf head cufflink rested, a pre-ceremony gift for Lucas. It was a small token, meant to mark this final night before our lives would be announced, publicly, irrevocably bound. Tomorrow, at the unification dinner, our families would declare the definitive date for the marking. In just a few short weeks, I, Helen Park, would become Luna to the future Commander-in-Chief of the United Clans. Helen Park, Luna of the Silverclaw clan. A genuine smile, one that reached deep into my hazel eyes, bloomed on my face. My world felt perfectly ordered, flawlessly designed. A sense of calm, of destiny fulfilled, settled over me as I moved through the evening. I strolled through the Academy's manicured grounds, the path beneath my worn boots familiar and comforting. Silent statues of legendary alphas stood guard, their stone gazes fixed on a future I believed was mine. Cadets in their impeccable uniforms moved with practiced ease, their conversations hushed, respectful. My path had been clear since the mate bond sparked between Lucas and me a year ago. He, the heir to the most powerful clan, the golden wolf of his generation, undeniably destined for greatness. And I, his other half, chosen by the fates themselves to stand by his side. His scent, clean pine and cold steel, was my constant anchor, a faint, reassuring whisper on the breeze. The bond, a warm, steady hum under my skin, always reminded me he was near, always devoted. People often called Lucas arrogant, cold, calculating, their whispers reaching my ears like distant, irrelevant echoes. But they didn't see the man who brought me rare, delicate flowers from the Northern Territories, or the way his ice-blue eyes would soften, melting into something tender and vulnerable whenever he looked at me. They saw the future commander. I saw Lucas. My dorm, in the Sterling Wing, stood as a monument to privilege, its quiet, echoing halls and polished oak floors reserved for the highest-ranking Silverclaw families. It was meant to be our sanctuary, a place where the world's chaos couldn't touch us. Lucas practically lived in my suite. His things mingled freely with mine, his scent, now my scent, woven through every thread of fabric, every corner of the room. It was our space, inviolable. But as I approached my door, a thin, persistent thread of wrongness snagged at the edge of my senses. The door stood ajar, a sliver of warm, inviting light spilling into the otherwise dim hallway. And the scent. Lucas's familiar pine and steel was there, yes, but it was followed by something else. A cloying, cheap perfume, heavy and sweet, the kind worn by she-wolves desperate for attention, who chased status with brazen ambition. And beneath it, sharp and musky, was the unmistakable smell of raw arousal. Someone else's arousal. A cold, heavy dread settled in the pit of my stomach, spreading like an icy ink stain. The warm hum of the mate bond, usually so constant and reassuring, flickered erratically, replaced by a faint, jarring static laced with a growing, nauseating anxiety. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a panicked bird trapped in a cage. "Lucas," I called out, my voice impossibly small and fragile, swallowed by the suddenly cavernous, accusing hall. A woman's low, breathy giggle answered from inside, a brazen violation in what I had considered our sacred space. It was immediately followed by the deep, familiar murmur of Lucas's voice, husky and intimately close, a sound that once thrilled me, now twisted my insides. My heart seized in my chest, a desperate, silent plea escaping my lips to a deaf universe. No, not him, not us. My body moved without conscious thought, my trembling hand pushing the heavy oak door open. The perfect, sweet lie I had been living for a year shattered into a million razor-sharp pieces, each fragment a testament to my profound stupidity, glittering like broken glass on the polished floor. He was there on my bed, the bed where he'd whispered promises of our shared future, where he'd held me close and told me I was his entire world. And he was not alone. A blonde she-wolf, Natasha, from a lower-ranked Silverclaw family, was beneath him. She was one of those who always looked at me with a sickeningly sycophantic smile in public, but whose eyes held a flicker of veiled venom I had foolishly dismissed as petty jealousy. Her uniform skirt was hiked up around her waist, tangled indecently. Her hands were still lost in his perfect golden hair. They froze, head snapping toward the door as the harsh light from the hallway illuminated their sordid tableau. Natasha had the decency to look utterly terrified, her eyes wide with a desperate, trapped animal fear as she tried to scramble away, her movements clumsy in her panic. But Lucas, his reaction broke me more profoundly than the act itself. There was a flash of fleeting shock, then a flicker of annoyance at being caught, yes. But there was no guilt, no remorse, just the cold, arrogant appraisal of a king whose private moments had been unforgivably interrupted. He pushed himself off Natasha, raking a dismissive hand through his hair, his expression settling into one of weary impatience, as if I were the one who had committed an unforgivable intrusion. "Helen," he said, his voice flat, utterly devoid of warmth, a stranger's tone. "You're early, early." The word was a vicious slap, dismissive, implying I had merely walked in on a business meeting that had run long. The pain was a physical blow, a silver knife twisting deep in my gut, searing me from the inside out. My wolf, the very core of my being that was tethered to him, let out a silent, agonizing howl of betrayal, a sound only I could hear, tearing at my spiritual core. The bond, our sacred connection, felt as if it were being violently torn from my soul, thread by excruciating thread, each snap of magic of fresh agony. For a single horrifying second, I thought I was going to collapse, that the sheer agony would dissolve me into nothing but tears and incoherent screams on the polished oak floor. My knees threatened to buckle. But then, something else happened. The white-hot pain didn't shatter me. It forged me. The searing heartbreak crystallized, hardening into something cold, dense, and utterly unbreakable. An icy, almost supernatural calm washed over me, chilling the tears before they could even form, turning my profound grief into a diamond-hard substance, pure, unadulterated rage. My face remained impassive, a mask of stone. I looked from his disheveled state to the terrified girl, then back to him, letting the silence stretch, letting him see the utter lack of the hysterical breakdown he was undoubtedly expecting. I watched his eyes, seeing the first flicker of uncertainty in their cold blue depths, a fleeting moment of confusion. This reaction, this cold emptiness, was not in his carefully constructed playbook. I reached into my pocket, my fingers closing around the velvet box, its soft fabric feeling alien in my rigid grip. I pulled it out, its silver cuffling glinting briefly, and tossed it onto the pristine white desk beside the door. It landed with a soft, yet utterly final thud, a period mark on a broken sentence. "Happy unification," I said, my voice devoid of all human emotion, a flat, chilling echo in the desecrated space. And then I turned and walked away. I didn't run. I couldn't. Running would imply panic, weakness. I walked. My posture was perfect, back straight, shoulders square, my steps even, measured, betraying none of the internal inferno that scorched me from the inside. I walked out of the Sterling wing, past the cadets who nodded respectfully at their future Luna. They didn't know. They were looking at a ghost. The woman they saw, Helen Park, had died in that room, suffocated by betrayal. In her place was something new, something cold, something vengeful. He broke our bond. He shattered our future. He humiliated me in the most intimate, unforgivable way possible. Crying wouldn't fix it. Screaming wouldn't punish him. There was only one thing that would truly suffice. I had to destroy him. Not his body, not his pathetic life, but his pride, his carefully curated future, his perfectly constructed legacy. Lucas's greatest ambition was to be commander-in-chief, to unite all the clans under the Silverclaw banner. His entire existence was a meticulous political chessboard, every move calculated, every relationship a strategic alliance. To beat him, to truly crush him, I had to make a move he would never, ever see coming. I had to align myself with the one piece on the board he could not control. His only true rival. The one wolf who defied his authority at every turn, whose raw, untamed power was a constant, infuriating challenge to Lucas's polished control. My path was set. My feet, guided by an instinct I didn't recognize, moved with purpose. I moved away from the manicured lawns and pristine, classical architecture of the Silverclaw territories. I crossed the Academy's central quad, a place I had always associated with the Silverclaw's suffocating dominance, and turned sharply toward the western sector, the Shadowfang territory. The air here was starkly different. It hit my senses like a physical presence. The buildings were more industrial, functional, scarred from relentless training, built for purpose rather than display. The clean scent of pine and cold steel was gone, replaced by something earthier, more primal. The smell of metal, sweat, and impending storms hung heavy in the air, a scent that hinted at raw power and dangerous potential. It was the scent of the opposition of a world entirely outside Lucas's gilded cage. I didn't slow down until I reached their primary training ground, a massive open-air arena known simply as the Pit. It was late, but the Shadowfangs were always training. Their discipline was born of necessity, not privilege, a harsh truth etched onto every face. It was why they were the only clan the Silverclaws considered a legitimate threat, a true challenge to their supremacy. Floodlights, stark and unforgiving, cast harsh, elongated shadows across the dirt and gravel floor. The sounds of combat filled the air. The rhythmic thud of bodies hitting mats, the sharp crack of sparring staffs, the guttural grunts of exertion, a symphony of controlled violence. And in the very center of it all I saw him. Mark, alpha heir of the Shadowfang Clan. He was the absolute antithesis of Lucas in every conceivable way, a stark contrast that hit me with the force of a physical blow. Where Lucas was golden-haired and fair, his image cultivated and polished, Mark was dark, his black hair plastered to his forehead with sweat, clinging to his strong features. Where Lucas wore tailored, immaculate uniforms designed to project effortless authority, Mark was stripped to the waist, his torso a roadmap of lean, hard muscle and faint, silvery scars. His body wasn't a political statement, it was a weapon, honed by relentless, brutal work, a testament to pure, unadulterated power. He was in the middle of a sparring match, disarming an opponent with a move that was brutally efficient and breathtakingly fast. He moved like a storm, all controlled chaos and devastating power, a force of nature in human form. He was everything Lucas pretended not to be. Primal, raw, dangerous. He was Lucas's greatest fear, and he was about to become my salvation. He must have felt my eyes on him. After slamming his opponent to the mat in a definitive final move, a clear statement of dominance, he straightened up, his chest heaving, his breathing ragged, audible even from my distance. He turned his head, and his eyes, a startling, intense shade of stormy gray, like thunderclouds gathering on a distant horizon, found me standing at the very edge of the harsh light. He saw me. He saw the state I was in, the ghost haunting my eyes, the cold fury that had replaced my very soul, laid bare for him to see. A flicker of confusion, then sharp, predatory interest crossed his face, a silent question in his gaze. I walked forward, my boots crunching on the loose gravel, each step deliberate, resonating in the quieted arena. My path cut straight through the middle of the training floor. The other Shadowfang wolves who had been engrossed in their own drills stopped what they were doing, watching me. A lone sterling wolf, walking uninvited, audacious, into the very heart of their territory. I didn't stop until I was standing directly in front of him. He was taller than I'd realized, his presence radiating a raw, undeniable heat that was a stark contrast to Lucas's cultivated coldness. The air around him smelled of sweat and thunderstorms, a scent that both repelled and drew me in equal measure, a conflicting pull that was strangely exhilarating. His stormy gray eyes scanned my face, searching, assessing, trying to decipher my intentions, peeling back layers I didn't even know I possessed. "Sterling," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the ground beneath my feet, a sound of earth and power. "You're a long way from home." I looked directly into the eyes of my former mate's greatest enemy. I let him see the shattered pieces of my heart, laid bare in my gaze, and the cold, hard promise of the war I was about to ignite. "I need a favor," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the agony still churning inside me, a steel edge to my tone. A slow, dangerous smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes but promised a world of chaos, touched his lips. "I'm listening." I took a deep, shaky breath, the scent of him, of his clan, of this desperate rebellion, filling my lungs, a strange blend of fear and exhilaration. This was my vow of vengeance. This was my declaration of war. "Mark me," I said, the words hanging in the air, heavy with unspoken weight. The words hung in the air between us, stark and shocking in the harsh, unforgiving light of the training arena. "Mark me." The surrounding Shadowfang wolves, who had been watching with detached curiosity, now stared in stunned disbelief. A Sterling, the promised mate of the Silverclaw heir, standing in the heart of their territory, asking their own alpha heir for the most sacred, most permanent of bonds. It was not just a request, it was an act of high treason, a declaration that would shake the very foundations of their world. Mark's dangerous smile didn't falter, a testament to his unflappable control, but his stormy gray eyes sharpened, dissecting me, peeling back every layer of my composure, seeing past the mask I wore. He saw the truth of my request in the rigid set of my shoulders, in the cold fire burning where my soul used to be. He didn't see a woman desperately in love. He saw a weapon being offered to him, handle first, honed for a purpose. "You know what you're asking," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that resonated deep in my bones. It wasn't a question, it was a final chance for me to back down, to turn and run back to the gilded cage I had just so dramatically fled. "I know," I replied, my voice unwavering, laced with a chilling resolve that surprised even myself. "I know it's a declaration of war. I know it will shatter the alliance between the clans. I know it will ruin Lucas Sterling. That's why I'm asking." The brutal, unvarnished honesty of it seemed to impress him. A flicker of respect, or perhaps just sheer amusement at my audacity, danced in his eyes, a glint of something dangerous. He tilted his head, his gaze studying the juncture of my neck and shoulder, the clean, unmarked skin that was supposed to have been claimed by Lucas tomorrow. "He finally did it then," Mark murmured, more to himself than to me, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. The golden boy finally tarnished his own crown. He met my gaze again, his eyes piercing. He cheated. I didn't have to answer. The confirmation was written all over my face, in the tight set of my jaw, the tremor of my lips. "In our room, on our bed," I added, the words feeling like shards of glass on my tongue, each syllable a fresh cut. I needed him to understand the depth of the betrayal, the raw, visceral reason for this madness, this desperate, radical act. Mark's jaw tightened, a flash of genuine, primal anger crossing his rugged features. Not for me, not for my heartbreak, but for the sheer arrogance of Lucas's act, the profound dishonor it represented. Lucas hadn't just betrayed his mate. He had insulted the sanctity of the mate bond itself, a cornerstone of their entire warrior culture, a sacrilege in their world. "And you want revenge," Mark restated, his voice low, his eyes narrowed, scrutinizing my every reaction. "You want to humiliate him in the most public, most permanent way possible. You want to take the one thing he believed was his by divine right, his fated mate, and give it to his greatest rival. He took a step closer, his presence a wall of raw heat and contained power, radiating a magnetic pull. You want to use me to destroy him? Yes, I said without shame, my gaze unwavering, meeting his intensity head on. And you get to use me to disrupt his ascension. You get the Sterling Alliance, or what's left of it. You get to drive a wedge so deep into the council that his claim to commander-in-chief will be crippled. This isn't a request born of passion, Mark. It's a political move, a mutually beneficial transaction. I was speaking his language now, the language of strategy, of power plays, of war, cold and calculated. He let out a short, humorless laugh, the sound harsh in the night air, devoid of true mirth. You've got ice in your veins, Sterling. I always knew there was more to you than just being Lucas's pretty little shadow. A queen hidden beneath the porcelain. He circled me slowly, his movements fluid and watchful, like a wolf assessing a potential ally, or perhaps a potential threat, every muscle tense. A mark is forever. It's a chain. It will bind you to me, to my pack. It will change you, fundamentally. The bond will demand loyalty. Are you prepared for that? Or will you run back to him the moment he whispers a pretty apology in your ear, tempting you with false promises? He is dead to me. I bit out, the words raw with the conviction that came from the deepest, most wounded part of my soul, an unshakable truth. And the woman he knew is dead with him. Mark stopped directly in front of me, his gaze intense, searching the very depths of my being. He was weighing the consequences. The fallout would be catastrophic. War between the clans was a very real possibility, a storm threatening to engulf them all, and his pack along with it. But the potential reward, the chance to shatter the Silverclaw dominance that had choked the other clans for a century, to finally break their oppressive grip, it was a prize worth any risk, no matter how severe. All right, Sterling, he said, his voice dropping, a decision made, etched in stone, sealing my fate. You want my mark. You want my alliance. You get it. But we do this on my terms. Here. Now. In front of my pack. So there can be no question of your allegiance. No turning back. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild drumbeat of terror and exhilarating finality. This was it. The point of no return. Fine. I breathed. The word barely a whisper, a silent agreement. He reached out, his callous fingers surprisingly gentle as he brushed my hair back from my shoulder. His touch was electric, a jolt of raw, untamed energy that was nothing like Lucas's cool, possessive touch. It was a spark in the overwhelming darkness, a flicker of something new and terrifyingly exciting, and my broken, vengeful heart answered it with a silent tremor. Kneel, he commanded softly, the word an intimate rumble that vibrated through my bones. It was an order, an alpha's first command to his potential mate, a test of my newfound loyalty. My pride, the last vestige of the Sterling heir, bristled within me, a ghost of my former self. But I looked into his stormy eyes and saw not a demand for blind submission, but a profound requirement for trust and initiation into his world. I swallowed my pride, a bitter taste on my tongue, and slowly, gracefully, sank to my knees in the rough gravel of the training pit, before him and his entire pack, laying myself bare. He knelt in front of me, bringing us eye to eye. He was so close I could see the flecks of silver in his stormy gray irises, like lightning trapped in a storm cloud, swirling with intensity. His breath, warm and smelling faintly of metal and sweat, caressed my face of primal scent. A mark given in anger is a curse, he said, his voice a low growl, devoid of his earlier amusement, carrying an ancient weight. I will not brand you with my rage. You came to me for vengeance, but the bond requires more. It requires a seed of something real. You will not be just my weapon, Helen. You will be my mate, my Luna. You will be a Shadowfang. Do you understand? He used my first name, Helen. It sounded different coming from him, stripped of the polite society softness, reforged into something stronger, truer, carrying a deep resonance. I didn't understand, not really, not entirely. All I understood was the gaping, bleeding wound in my soul and the desperate, urgent need to cauterize it with this act, to make it real. But I saw the truth in his eyes. This was not a simple transaction to him. It was something more. It was a commitment. I understand, I lied. Or maybe in some small, terrified part of my soul, a seed of new truth began to sprout, and I spoke the truth without realizing it. He nodded, a grim satisfaction on his face. He held up his hand, and Christian, one of his betas, a watchful figure in the shadows, silently passed him a ceremonial dagger, its obsidian blade gleaming under the harsh floodlights, reflecting the starkness of our situation. Mark made a shallow, clean cut across his own palm. Blood, dark and rich, welled up, beating at the incision, a testament to his willingness. He held his bleeding palm out to me, an offering, a challenge. The bond must be accepted willingly, with blood and intent. Swear your loyalty, Helen, not to me, to my pack, to the Shadowfangs. I looked at his outstretched hand. This was the final seal on my old life's coffin, the last nail. I took a deep breath, the scent of the impending bond filling my lungs, a mix of his wildness and my own fear. And with a hand that was shockingly steady, a newfound resolve in my fingers, I reached out. I didn't have a blade, so I did the next best thing. I drew my own sharp canine teeth over the soft, sensitive flesh of my thumb, breaking the skin with a faint sting. I pressed my bleeding thumb to his bleeding palm, mingling our life forces. The moment our blood mingled, the world exploded around me. It was not the warm, gentle hum of my bond with Lucas, a quiet, soothing presence. This was a cataclysm, a lightning strike that arced between us, a raw, untamed power that roared through my veins and slammed into my very soul, rattling my bones. The air crackled with a palpable, furious energy, sparks seeming to fly. I cried out, a gasp torn from my throat, as a torrent of sensation overwhelmed me. The bracing smell of a thunderstorm breaking over an ancient, untouched forest, the exhilarating feeling of running wild and free under a full moon, the gut-deep, unconditional loyalty of a wolf to its pack, so profound it was almost painful. It was chaotic, savage, and terrifyingly wonderfully alive, awakening something ancient within me. I felt his strength, the deep history of his struggles, the fierce, protective love he held for the wolves who followed him. And I felt him feel my own pain, the raw, bleeding wound of my betrayal, the depth of my despair. He grunted, his eyes clenching shut for a moment as the full force of the bond hit him, his body reacting instinctively. This was real, fate-damned, terrifyingly real. My act of cold, calculated revenge had just unleashed a primal force of nature that neither of us had expected, a force that would change everything. He opened his eyes, and the gray in them was swirling, a storm of power and shock, electric and alive. He leaned in, his lips brushing against my ear, his breath warm and raw, sending shivers through my body, a strange blend of fear and desire. "Hold on," he whispered, his voice rough with the raw power surging through him, a current of energy that bound us. Then he lowered his head to my neck. He didn't hesitate. He sank his teeth into my flesh at the exact spot where Lucas's sterling mark should have been, where his claim would have rested. The pain was sharp, agonizing, a burning fire, but it was a clean pain. It was a pain that burned away the ghostly echoes of Lucas's touch, that cauterized the wound of his betrayal, purifying me. It was a pain that felt like salvation. Through the agony, the bond solidified, slamming into place like a castle gate securing a priceless treasure, locking us together. His power, his indomitable spirit, his very essence flooded me, chasing out the last vestiges of Lucas's coldness and filling the empty spaces with his own wild storm, a chaotic symphony of new sensations. When he finally pulled back, his mouth was stained with my blood, a dark contrast against his skin. He looked at me, his eyes blazing, a possessive, triumphant fire in their depths, a silent claim. The Shadowfang wolves around us, who had been silent witnesses to our brutal, beautiful union, let out a collective, rumbling howl. It was a sound of acceptance, a sound of welcome, a sound of war. He stood up, pulling me to my feet. I swayed, my legs weak, trembling uncontrollably beneath me. my senses reeling from the overwhelming power of the new bond, an almost physical current that hummed through every cell. I looked down at my thumb where my blood had mixed with his, seeing the undeniable evidence of our new link. Then I touched my neck. Beneath the fresh blood of his bite, I could already feel the magic knitting my skin back together, forming a new symbol, a new allegiance, a brand of ownership. A snarling wolf's head, rendered in storm gray and silver, the Shadowfang crest, now indelibly etched onto my skin. I had done it. I had marked his rival. Just then, a commotion erupted at the entrance to the pit, a sudden jarring noise that cut through the aftermath. A group of Silverclaw guards, Lucas's personal honor guard, stood there, their faces masks of horror and disbelief, their impeccable uniforms a stark contrast to the gritty setting. And behind them, pushing his way to the front, was Lucas. His face was pale, his ice blue eyes wide with a fury so profound it seemed to vibrate the very air around him, making the hairs on my arms prickle. He stared at me, then at the blood on my neck, then at Mark's possessive hand still resting on my arm, a silent, defiant claim. He saw the new mark beginning to form, its outlines already clear. The sound he made was not human. It was a strangled, agonized roar of pure, possessive rage. The rage of a king who had just watched his most prized possession willingly walk into his enemy's arms and burn his kingdom to the ground. The war had begun, undeniably, irrevocably, and I was no longer a pawn. I was the flashpoint. I was the spark. I was the queen of the coming storm. Lucas's roar of fury echoed off the pit's cold metal walls, a sound of absolute violation that promised bloodshed. His honor guard tensed, their hands flying to the ceremonial blades at their hips, a collective motion, the air crackling with the undeniable prelude to violence. The Shadowfangs answered the challenge, their casual training stances hardening into a wall of grim, battle-ready wolves, their muscles tensed, their eyes sharp. A low, collective growl rumbled through their chests, a deep, resonating sound that vibrated through the ground. The arena had transformed from a training ground into a powder keg, primed and ready, and I was standing right on top of it, the fuse lit. The new bond with Mark, a living, breathing thing inside me, pulsed with a wild storm of sensation and power. It sang with a fierce, possessive energy, rising to meet Lucas's unleashed rage, matching it note for note. I could feel Mark's own fury, a cold, controlled anger at this brazen intrusion into his territory, this direct challenge to his new claim, a violation of his alpha authority. He didn't move, but I felt the coiled tension in his body through the hand that remained firmly, protectively on my arm, an unspoken promise of violence. You! Lucas spat, his accusing finger trembling as he pointed directly at me, his voice a raw rasp of hatred. His perfect golden boy composure was utterly shattered, revealing the ugly, tyrannical beast that had always lurked beneath, barely hidden. What have you done? I should have been afraid. The old Helen would have been terrified, crumbling under the sheer force of his wrath, shrinking into herself, a ghost of her former self. But the old Helen was dead, annihilated in that desecrated room. The new Helen, the one forged in betrayal and marked by a storm, felt a cold, exhilarating power rise within her, a thrilling defiance that tasted of victory. I took a deliberate step forward, moving out from behind Mark, leaving his shield, forcing Lucas to face me alone, without the illusion of his former power over me. What have I done? I asked, my voice dangerously calm, barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the tension like a razor. I believe the question is, what have you done, Lucas? On my bed, with my supposed friend. A ripple of shock and disgust went through the assembled wolves, even his own guards, their expressions momentarily faltering. The rumor of his infidelity was one thing. My public, unshakable confirmation of it was another entirely. It was a stain on his honor that would be impossible to wash away, a wound to his pride that would fester. His face flushed with pure, unadulterated rage, a dark crimson. He took a menacing step forward onto Shadowfang ground, a clear violation of their territory, his body language aggressive. That is a private matter between mates, he snarled, his voice tight with barely suppressed violence. We are not mates, I corrected him, the words sharp and precise, like the snap of a whip, hitting their mark. You forfeited that right. You broke the bond. I merely finalized the dissolution. By whoring yourself out to him, he snarled, his gaze flicking to Mark with utter contempt, as if his touch on me was a contamination, a disease. By letting that feral animal put his filthy mark on you. You have shamed yourself. You have shamed your family. No, Mark's voice cut in, a low, lethal growl that commanded immediate attention, silencing Lucas's outburst, quelling his rage with raw dominance. She has honored herself. She chose loyalty over lies, something you clearly know nothing about. He stepped up beside me, not in front of me, but next to me. A partner, an equal. His presence was a solid, undeniable force, radiating controlled power. This is Shadowfang territory, Sterling. You and your pups have 10 seconds to get off it before I consider your presence an act of war. Lucas's ice blue eyes blazed, spitting fire. He was an alpha and used to giving orders and used to being commanded, especially by him. She is a Sterling. She is coming with me. He lunged, not for Mark, but directly for me. He was fast, a golden blur of rage, his hand shooting out to grab my wrist, intent on dragging me out of there, reclaiming his property by brute force of primal urge. But the new bond was faster. It was a reflex, an instinct, before my mind could even fully process the threat. I was moving. The countless hours I'd spent in defensive training, always holding back, always careful not to outshine my mate, were a distant, irrelevant memory, erased by the immediacy of the moment. I reacted with the raw, untamed instinct the bond was flooding me with, a surge of adrenaline and predatory cunning. I twisted out of his grasp, using his own momentum against him. I hooked my foot behind his ankle and shoved, a move I'd seen the Shadowfangs practice 100 times, brutally efficient. Lucas, the Golden Wolf, the top cadet of Blackwood Academy, stumbled. He didn't fall, but he staggered, his perfect, arrogant form broken, his attack thwarted, his pride visibly wounded. He looked at me with stunned disbelief, his eyes wide with shock. I had never, not once, raised a hand against him. Don't, I warned, my voice deadly soft, a chilling whisper that promised retribution. Touch me again. He stared at me, then at Mark, who was watching with a predatory, approving gleam in his stormy eyes, a silent testament to my transformation. Lucas's mind was working, the politician in him finally overriding the enraged wolf, the calculating part of his brain taking over. He saw the united front we presented. He saw the grim, unyielding determination on the faces of the Shadowfang wolves, their solidarity intimidating. He knew he couldn't win this fight. Not here. Not now. His fury receded, draining from his face, replaced by the cold, calculating mask I knew so well, a familiar unsettling sight. He straightened his uniform, smoothing down the fabric, a sneer twisting his handsome features, a last-ditch effort at control. This changes nothing, he hissed at me, his eyes promising retribution, a viper's venom. You are mine, by fate, by right. This charade will not last. When you come crawling back to me, and you will, I will burn his mark from your skin myself. He turned on his heel and stalked away, his honor guard falling in behind him like chastened dogs, their heads bowed in shame. His parting threat hung in the air, a poisonous promise of a war fought not on the battlefield, but for the very territory of my soul, a battle for my essence. The moment he was gone, the adrenaline that had been surging through me receded, draining from my limbs, leaving me swaying on my feet. The events of the last hour crashed down on me with overwhelming force, the brutal betrayal, the public confrontation, the irreversible marking. My legs felt like water, weak and trembling uncontrollably beneath me, my muscles burning from the sudden exertion. Mark's arm shot out, steadying me, a solid anchor. Easy, he murmured, his voice close to my ear, a deep, comforting rumble that resonated through the new bond, soothing my frayed nerves. The first few hours after the bond settles are rough. It's rewriting you, physically, emotionally. He was right. It felt like my entire cellular structure was being recoded, reshaped. The last echoes of Lucas's coldness were being purged, replaced by the wild, stormy energy of the man beside me. It was exhilarating and utterly exhausting, a paradox of sensations. "I need a drink," I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips, a plea. A slow, knowing grin spread across Mark's face, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "Now you're speaking my language." He turned to his pack, the tension in the arena dissipating, replaced by an excited buzz. "Training's over. Go celebrate. We have a new Luna." A roar of approval went up from the Shadowfangs. They were a boisterous, rowdy clan, their loyalty fierce and hard-won, earned through shared struggle. They slapped Mark on the back, their acceptance palpable, and a few even gave me respectful, if wary nods. They didn't trust me yet, not completely, not fully earned, but I was their alpha's choice. For now, that was enough. Mark led me away from the pit, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back, a gesture that was both protective and subtly possessive, guiding me through the throng. He didn't take me to a formal officers' club like Lucas would have, a sterile environment of polished wood and hushed, gossiping conversations. Instead, he took me to a dive bar just off campus, a place frequented by off-duty Shadowfang warriors. It was loud, filled with raucous laughter and the clinking of glasses. It smelled of stale beer, sawdust, and honest sweat, a raw, authentic aroma. It was more welcoming, more real, more alive than any sterile drawing room I had ever been in. He got us 2 glasses of cheap whiskey, its amber liquid glinting in the dim light, and we settled into a dark, secluded booth, a pocket of privacy amidst the revelry. The alcohol burned a welcome path down my throat, steadily calming my frayed nerves, dulling the sharp edges of my trauma. "So," he said, leaning back against the worn leather, studying me over the rim of his glass, his stormy gray eyes unreadable, yet curious. "How does it feel to burn down the world?" "Terrifying," I admitted, the truth bubbling up, raw and unbidden, tasting like ashen victory. "And better than I could have possibly imagined." He nodded slowly, a hint of understanding in his gaze, a shared knowledge. "He'll come for you," Mark said, his tone turning serious, losing its playful edge, becoming grim. "He won't let this go. His pride won't allow it. The council will be in an uproar by morning. They'll try to annul the marking, citing some ancient loophole." A knot of cold fear tightened in my stomach, a familiar, unwelcome sensation threatening to resurface. "Can they?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, dread creeping in. "No," he said with certainty, his voice firm, dispelling my fear with its sheer power, like a wave washing over stone. "A mark willingly given and accepted is magically binding. The fates have had their say, but they'll make our lives hell. They'll try to isolate the Shadowfangs, cut off our resources. They'll sanction us. They'll try to break us apart from the outside, slowly, systematically. And you're okay with that?" I asked, looking into his steady, unyielding eyes, seeing the resolve etched there. "You've taken on a war for a woman you don't even know, whose past is messy." "I know you're a fighter," he said, his gaze intense, piercing through my every facade, seeing the core of me. "I saw it tonight, and I've been waiting for a war with the Silverclaws my entire life. You just gave me the perfect reason to start it, the justification I needed." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, intimate rumble that vibrated through the air between us, a sensual current. "But make no mistake, Helen. We're in this together now. The bond won't allow for anything else. My fight is your fight, and your ex-boyfriend is now my problem, a very personal problem." A few days later, the inevitable confrontation happened. The academy was a small, insular world, and news traveled like wildfire, every rumor fanned by eager mouths. I was walking across the main quad, Mark at my side, his presence a comforting shield, a steady warmth against my skin, when we saw Lucas heading our way, flanked by 2 of his senior cadets. It was a deliberate interception, calculated and precise, a trap laid. "Helen," Lucas said, stopping directly in front of us, his voice dripping with an oily, false concern that made my skin crawl, a sickly sweet poison. "My father, King Arthur, wants to speak with you. He's willing to be lenient, to find a way to fix this, to sweep it under the rug." "There's nothing to fix," Mark answered for me, his arms sliding possessively, subtly, around my waist, a gentle, yet undeniable claim. Lucas's eyes narrowed, his gaze flicking to Mark's arm before returning to me, his focus still disturbingly on me. He ignored Mark completely, as if he were nothing more than an inanimate piece of furniture, a shadow that didn't exist. Don't be a fool, Helen. You're a Park. You belong with us, with your own kind, not with this Bakali clan, these rough savages. He reached out his hand, closing around my arm, his grip bruising, a desperate, pathetic attempt to assert ownership. Come with me now, and we can put this unfortunate incident behind us, pretend it never happened. His face was close to mine, his breath warm against my cheek, sickeningly familiar. You're mine, he hissed, his words a desperate, possessive command, meant to break me, to strip away my defiance. This was my chance, my moment. The reason I had done all of this. I didn't pull away. I didn't flinch. My body held steady, rooted. I simply looked him directly in the eye and laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound, devoid of humor, an echo of the fury still burning within me, a sound of absolute contempt. You were, I said, my voice sweet as poison, cutting him to the bone, each word a precise strike. But that's over. I deliberately leaned into Mark's embrace, my body flushing against his, a blatant, public rejection of everything Lucas stood for, a defiance that burned. I looked back at Lucas, a smirk playing on my lips, cold and sharp. Now I am his, and he is better. I let my gaze trail down Lucas's immaculate uniform, a symbol of his carefully constructed perfection, then slowly back up, my smirk widening, taking in his stunned face. Both in battle and in bed, the shot was so direct, so personal, so utterly humiliating that for a moment, Lucas couldn't even breathe. His face went from pale to crimson, a deep, angry flush spreading across his cheeks, his composure dissolving. His grip on my arm tightened painfully, a desperate, final assertion of control, a last act of possession. But before he could react, Mark's hand clamped down on Lucas's wrist like a vice, a silent threat. The lady said, Mark growled, his voice dropping to a lethal pitch that brooked no argument, a rumble of thunder, to take your hand off her. With a sharp, sudden twist, Mark forced Lucas to release me, breaking his hold. The two alphas stood nose to nose, a silent, vicious war being waged in the charged space between them, their wills clashing. The battle lines were drawn, undeniable, and I had just fired the shot that would echo through their entire world, a gunshot in the silence. I had made my choice, irrevocably, and I would live with the consequences, no matter how bloody they became. My declaration on the quad became academy legend overnight. The story spread like wildfire, whispered in mess halls and training grounds, embellished with every telling, the phrase better in battle, better in bed becoming a brutal, public castration of Lucas Sterling's pride. Consequences followed, swift and severe. The Silverclaw clan, led by Lucas's iron-willed father, King Arthur, retaliated. Not with open warfare, not yet, but with the cold, precise cruelty of politics. The Shadowfangs were systematically isolated. Our supply lines were choked, resources dwindling. Our allies on the council were threatened into silence, their allegiances tested under immense pressure. We were declared a rogue element, a clan led by a rabid wolf and his treacherous sterling harlot. The word harlot was used often, a poisoned dart aimed directly at me, intended to shame me into submission. It didn't work. Shame was a luxury I could no longer afford. It had burned away in the fires of betrayal, leaving only embers of defiance. Life in the Shadowfang territory was a stark, brutal contrast to the polished, deceptive world I'd known. The training was relentless, pushing my body and spirit to their limits, demanding everything I had. Resources were scarce, a constant reminder of the Silverclaw's oppressive grip, a daily struggle. And the constant, gnawing threat of a Silverclaw-backed attack kept everyone on edge, a low thrum of anxiety beneath the surface, ever present. But there was a fierce, unwavering loyalty here, a sense of unbreakable unity that the Silverclaws, with their political maneuvering and arranged alliances, could never replicate. The Shadowfangs weren't just a clan. They were a family, forged in adversity, hardened by struggle, and fiercely protective of their own. And now, against all odds, I was one of them, a new piece of their tough, resilient fabric. Mark was true to his word. My fight became his fight, his burden, a responsibility he took without question. He never let me face the scorn alone. When members of the council, emboldened by King Arthur, tried to publicly berate me during a heated assembly, he stood at my side, his quiet, menacing presence a formidable shield that silenced their venomous whispers, an unspoken promise of violence. When Silverclaw cadets, fueled by Lucas's humiliated rage, tried to harass me on campus, he was there, a storm cloud of protective fury that sent them scattering like frightened pups, their bravado evaporating. And the bond? The bond was a wild, tumultuous force, nothing like the placid, carefully controlled connection I'd shared with Lucas. This bond was demanding, intuitive, and intensely physical. I could feel Mark's moods as if they were my own. His frustration during stifling council meetings, a tight knot in my own stomach. His pure exhilaration during rigorous training drills, a surge of power through my limbs. His simmering, righteous anger at the injustices leveled against his pack, a shared fire in my blood. And his desire. That was the most overwhelming part. It was a constant, low-burning fire, a current of raw, primal energy that flowed between us, leaving me breathless and aching at the most inopportune moments, a delicious torment. We hadn't taken the final step, hadn't fully consummated the bond. The nights, in a way, were a form of exquisite torture. He'd given me his guest quarters, a Spartan but comfortable room next to his own. He respected a boundary I hadn't even known I needed, giving me space to heal from the profound trauma of Lucas's betrayal, even as the bond screamed for consummation, for completion, for release. Our nights were spent talking. We'd sit in the common area of his quarters, a bottle of cheap whiskey between us, its rough scent mingling with his earthy, storm-laden scent, a comforting mix. He'd tell me stories of his clan, tales of their ancient defiance, of his childhood spent fighting for respect in the shadow of the Silverclaw's suffocating dominance, a history of struggle. And I, in turn, found myself opening up about my own life, about the suffocating pressure of being the perfect Sterling, the perfect mate, the perfect pawn in a game I hadn't understood. They were dialogues in the dark, weaving our disparate pasts together, building an unlikely but solid foundation for our volatile future, a bond forged in trust and shared vulnerability. But the war was escalating. Lucas, unable to attack us directly without triggering open, full-scale conflict, resorted to guerrilla tactics, insidious and underhanded. He began challenging Mark's authority through official channels, demanding formal duels to settle territorial disputes that had been dormant for years, a clear attempt to provoke. It was a transparent maneuver to force Mark into a public fight, to prove his superiority in single combat, to prove that my taunt had been a lie, to reclaim his lost honor. The first official duel was set for a week after my marking. The dispute was over access to the Whisperwood, a neutral training territory the Silverclaws coveted. It was a fight Mark couldn't refuse without looking weak, without dishonoring his pack, a critical test of his leadership. The entire academy turned out to watch, the air thick with anticipation, a palpable hum of excitement and tension. The arena was divided, Silverclaws on one side, a sea of polished silver and gold, their faces a mixture of smug superiority and eager anticipation. And the Shadowfangs on the other, a defiant block of gray and black, their expressions grim and resolute, a wall of unwavering support. I stood with the Shadowfang command, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, each beat echoing the rhythm of the new bond. The bond was a torrent of nervous energy, a feedback loop of Mark's intense focus and my own surging anxiety, a shared tremor. Lucas entered the arena first, looking every inch the golden champion. His armor was gleaming, meticulously polished, his movements fluid and rehearsed. His expression was serene and confident, every gesture calculated for maximum impact. He was playing to the crowd, the noble alpha force to discipline a lesser rival. Then Mark entered. He wore no polish, no pretense, just simple black combat leathers, practical and unadorned. His expression was grim and focused, his aura radiating raw power, a primal force. He didn't look at the crowd, didn't acknowledge their presence, their eager eyes. His stormy gray eyes found mine, and for a fleeting moment, the world fell away, shrinking to just us. He gave me a sharp, almost imperceptible nod, a silent promise, a flash of connection. I've got this. The fight began. It was a brutal ballet of violence, a clash of two opposing forces. Lucas was technically flawless, his style precise, textbook perfect, honed by generations of Silverclaw tradition. He moved with a cold, aristocratic grace, every strike efficient and calculated. But Mark fought like a force of nature. He was unpredictable, raw, drawing on pure instinct, a wild thing unleashed. He used his environment, his innate ferocity, his sheer, unadulterated power, a whirlwind of controlled chaos. He was the storm I'd first seen in the pit, now fully unleashed in its full destructive glory. It was a battle of control versus chaos, of tradition versus primal strength, and for a long time, they were evenly matched. Lucas was scoring points with clean, precise strikes, his movements fluid and sharp. Mark was landing heavier, more punishing blows that threw Lucas off his rhythm, forcing him to react rather than dictate, to defend rather than attack. Then Lucas made a mistake, a fatal flaw born of his deep-seated arrogance and burning hatred. He saw an opening and lunged, his blade aimed at Mark's shoulder. But it was a feint. At the last second, his eyes flickered to me, a look of pure, venomous hatred on his handsome face, a flash of true malice. He shifted his aim, not for a disabling blow on Mark, but for a deep, scarring slash across his cheek, a move designed not to win the duel, but to mar, to ruin the face of the man who had stolen me, to leave a permanent mark of his own twisted claim, a cruel brand. The bond screamed a warning, a visceral, electric jolt through my entire being, a shockwave of fear. I felt Mark's surge of rage, cold and absolute, at the dishonorable tactic, at the direct threat aimed through him at me, a violation of their unspoken rules. Mark moved with impossible speed, a blur of motion. He didn't try to block the blade outright. Instead, he twisted, taking the full force of the blow along his ribs, a deep, gouging wound that would have staggered any other wolf, bringing them to their knees. But the move put him inside Lucas's guard, a dangerous position. With a guttural roar, Mark slammed the pommel of his own sword into Lucas's jaw, a sickening crunch echoing through the arena as Lucas staggered back, stunned, disoriented, his body momentarily broken. Mark dropped his sword, his hands closing around Lucas's throat, thick and powerful, and lifted him, clean off his feet. He held the golden alpha of the Silverclaw suspended in the air, choking, his feet dangling uselessly, a puppet on strings. He could have snapped his neck. He could have ended the war right there, in front of the entire academy, a decisive blow. The arena was silent, horrified, the crowd holding its breath. Mark's stormy eyes locked onto Lucas's terrified, bulging ones, a silent, primal challenge, a promise of death. You ever, Mark snarled, his voice a low, guttural promise of death, each word dripping with venom. Look at her like that again, and the next duel will not be with swords. He threw Lucas to the ground like a broken doll, a dismissive gesture. The match was over. The judge, pale-faced and trembling, declared Mark the victor, his voice shaking. The Shadowfangs erupted in a deafening roar of triumph, their cries echoing through the very bones of the academy, a sound of unbridled joy. Mark had not only won the duel, he had utterly dominated and publicly humiliated the Silverclaw heir, stripping him of his dignity. I ran to him as the medics swarmed, my heart in my throat, each beat a frantic, painful throb. The gash on his side was deep, bleeding profusely, staining his black leathers a stark, vibrant red. I'm fine, he grunted, waving off the medics with a dismissive hand as he leaned heavily on me. His arm draped over my shoulders, a comforting weight. Just a scratch. That is not a scratch, you idiot, I said, my voice thick with a terror I couldn't hide. a fear that was both new and utterly overwhelming, a primal instinct. The bond was pulsing with his pain, a sharp, stabbing agony that echoed directly in my own body, an intimate, shared suffering that bound us closer. He looked down at me, a pained but triumphant grin on his face, a smear of blood at the corner of his lips. "Was I better?" he rasped, his voice rough, heavy with exertion. Tears I didn't know I was holding back welled in my eyes, blurring his face. "You were magnificent," I whispered, the words heartfelt, true, a profound admiration welling up inside me. Later that night, after the medics had stitched him up with careful hands and pumped him full of potions, their sense of antiseptic and herbs filling the air, I found him in his private quarters. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, shirtless, the stark white bandage around his torso a brutal contrast to his tan skin, a testament to the savagery of the day. I stood in the doorway, my arms wrapped around myself, feeling a tremor run through me, a shiver of lingering shock. "Thank you," I said softly, the words quiet in the dimly lit room, filled with shadows. "For what you did, for what you said." He looked up, his gray eyes dark and serious in the lamplight, probing mine. "He threatened my mate, Helen. There is no thanking me for that. It's what I will always do, what my wolf demands." The air between us was thick with unspoken words, with the raw fire of the bond, with the undeniable intimacy of shared battle, a silent understanding passing between us. The carefully constructed space he had, until now, so diligently put between us had been erased by the blood and violence of the day, torn down by the intensity of our shared experience. I walked toward him slowly, drawn by an invisible thread, and sat on the bed beside him. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly, and gently traced the edge of the fresh scar on his cheek, the one Lucas had managed to inflict, a permanent reminder. "The price of defending me. It's my fault," I whispered, my voice thick with guilt, the weight of the day settling heavily upon me, a crushing burden. "This scar, the wound in your side, this war, it's all my fault." "No," he growled, his voice a low rumble, warm and steady, cutting through my self-blame. He captured my hand, his grip strong and reassuring, and brought it to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to my knuckles, a gesture of tenderness. "This war was coming long before you walked into my training pit. You just gave us all a cause worth fighting for, a catalyst." He held my gaze, his own eyes burning with an emotion that went far beyond political alliance or shared revenge, a deep, consuming fire. "The only thing that's your fault," he murmured, his thumb stroking my skin, sending shivers through me, "is that I can't get you out of my head, not for a second." He leaned in, his gaze dropping to my lips. This was it. The moment the ceasefire ended. The moment the bed dialogues became something more, something tangible. The promise of the bond was about to be fulfilled, its pull undeniable. "Mark," I breathed, a mixture of fear and longing churning inside me, a delicious tremor. "Lucas doesn't own your past," he murmured, his lips brushing against mine, a tantalizing whisper. "And he sure as hell doesn't own your future." His other hand came up to cup my face, his thumb stroking my cheek, his touch sending shivers down my spine, igniting a warmth deep within. "But I'm not going to lie, Helen. I want to own your present, just for tonight." And then he kissed me. It was not the angry, possessive kiss of a conqueror, but a kiss of deep, aching tenderness, a soft exploration. A kiss that spoke of shared pain and fierce, unwavering loyalty, a silent vow. It was the kiss of a warrior who had found his reason to fight, and a queen who had found a king worthy of her war. The price of this new life was paid in scars and blood, a raw, undeniable cost. But as I kissed him back, surrendering to the storm, to him, I knew without a doubt that I would pay it 1,000 times over for this newfound truth. Our affair, if something so profoundly deep and magically binding could be called something so simple, became the undeniable engine of the escalating war. The lines were no longer just political. They were deeply, irrevocably personal, etched in our very beings. We, the disgraced mate and the usurping rival, bound together, became the ultimate offense to the Silver Claw regime. Stronger and more defiant with every passing day, our unity was a constant challenge to their power. Mark healed quickly, his wolf's vitality knitting his flesh back together with astonishing speed, leaving barely a trace. But the scars remained, the faint, silvery line on his cheek, a stark reminder of Lucas's malice, and the jagged, silvery scar on his ribs, a testament to his sacrifice. They were my marks on him, just as his was on me. We were scarred by the same war, irrevocably linked by its painful memory. The academy transformed into a minefield. Duels, both sanctioned and not, became commonplace, a violent undercurrent to daily life, threatening to erupt at any moment. Brawls broke out in the mess hall, tensions running so high that a spilled drink could ignite a full-scale skirmish, turning camaraderie into chaos. Training exercises, once routine, turned into genuine skirmishes, the line between practice and real combat blurring dangerously. The Silverclaws, led by a publicly humiliated and increasingly unhinged Lucas, pushed us at every opportunity, trying to provoke a reaction that would justify a full-scale assault, a true war to reclaim his dominance. Through it all, Mark and I became a unified front, an unstoppable force. We moved as one, our steps synchronized, our intentions aligned. We trained together in the pit, a whirlwind of coordinated strikes and defenses, our bond creating an unnerving synergy that other pairs couldn't match, a seamless dance of power. We anticipated each other's moves, our bodies flowing together, a deadly, beautiful dance of instinct and skill. He taught me the raw, brutal style of the Shadowfangs, the visceral power of instinct, and I taught him the precise, strategic fencing of the Sterlings, the nuanced art of calculated deflection. We were forging a new way to fight, a fusion of our two worlds, creating something stronger than either had been alone. In the council chambers, we were just as formidable. I knew the Silverclaw playbook intimately. Their political tactics, their hidden weaknesses, their predictable arrogance, their every move laid bare before me. I became Mark's strategist, his whisper in the dark, predicting Lucas's moves before he even made them, anticipating his every chess move. We exposed their corruption, their secret deals, their hypocrisy, patiently winning over smaller, neutral clans who were tired of living under the Silverclaw's heavy, suffocating thumb. We were no longer just the opposition, we were a revolution, gaining momentum with every victory, every exposed lie. Lucas couldn't stand it. Watching me at Mark's side, not as a broken victim, but as a sharp, capable Luna who was actively dismantling his future, was eating him alive. A corrosive acid. He grew reckless, his attacks more desperate, more unhinged, losing his careful control. The final confrontation, the inevitable climax, came during the annual Gauntlet, the Academy's most grueling and prestigious military exercise. It was a week-long war game held in the dense, treacherous Whisperwood, pitting the clans against each other in a brutal test of strategy, strength, and survival. The final objective was to capture the opposing clan's flag from their fortified command post. It was the ultimate prize, the ultimate humiliation for the losing side. The Shadowfangs had fought our way to the final day, battered but unbowed, their resolve unbroken. Only one opponent remained, the Silverclaws. Our command post was a cave system deep in the heart of the forest. The air was cold and damp, the scent of earth and tension thick around us, clinging to our skin, raising goosebumps. Mark, his command team, and I were hunched over a holographic map, planning our final defense, our breaths misting in the cold air. "He's going to come himself," I said, pointing to a weak point in our northern perimeter. My instincts, sharpened by the bond, screamed it. "He won't send a proxy. His pride is on the line. He needs to beat you personally, to prove his dominance." "Let him come," Mark growled, a predatory light in his eyes, a glint of steel. "We'll be waiting." But Lucas was more desperate than I'd anticipated. He didn't launch a full frontal assault, predictable and straightforward. Instead, he used a tactic of pure dishonor, a move that flew in the face of all martial tradition, betraying every code. Under the cover of a diversionary attack on our northern flank, he and a small, elite team used silver-lace climbing gear to scale the sheer, supposedly impassable cliff face at the rear of our command post. It was a move that was technically against the gauntlet's rules of honorable engagement, a clear sign of his unraveling mind, his desperation overriding his honor. The alarm blared through the cave system, a harsh, piercing shriek that signaled their breach into our inner sanctum, a cold dread washing over me. "They are inside," one of the guards yelled, his voice strained, a note of panic. Chaos erupted. Mark roared orders, his voice cutting through the pandemonium, sending our warriors to intercept, but it was too late. Lucas was already here, a phantom in our stronghold. He burst into our command center, his face wild, contorted by fury, his eyes burning with a mad, obsessive light. He wasn't here just for the flag. He was here for me. "Helen," he roared, his gaze locking on me, a possessive fire in his eyes. He ignored Mark, ignored the guards drawing their weapons, ignored everything but his singular, twisted obsession. "This ends now. You are coming with me." He lunged, not for the flag, but directly at me. But Mark was there, a blur of gray and black, intercepting him, a solid wall between us. The two alphas crashed into each other, a brutal explosion of hatred and rivalry, a thunderclap of warring wills. Swords were forgotten. This was tooth and claw, the primal fury of their wolves unleashed, raw and savage. They slammed against the holographic table, shattering it with a deafening crack. They rolled across the floor, snarling, tearing, two primal beasts fighting for ultimate dominance, their roars echoing in the confined space. But while they fought, Lucas's two elite guards slipped past, their target clear. The Shadowfang flag, mounted on the wall, a symbol of our victory. I saw their move, a cold clarity settling over me, my mind racing. Mark was locked in a life-or-death struggle, his focus entirely on Lucas. My guards were moving to help him, leaving the flag exposed, vulnerable. Losing it now meant losing the gauntlet, a public humiliation that would cripple our growing alliance, undermining all our hard-won gains. I didn't hesitate. I drew the dagger from my boot, a Shadowfang blade Mark had given me, its obsidian edge feeling solid and familiar in my grip, a weight of purpose. I launched myself at the two Silverclaw guards. They were bigger, stronger, their movements confident, but they underestimated me. They still saw the sterling porcelain doll, not the wolf Mark had awakened within me, not the warrior I had become. I ducked under the first one's clumsy grab, my senses heightened, my body moving on instinct, a fluid dance of survival. I sank my dagger into the weak spot in his armor at the thigh. A swift, precise strike. He roared in pain and went down, clutching the wound, his face pale. The second one came at me, his sword raised, gleaming menacingly in the dim light. I met his blade with my dagger, the screech of metal echoing in the cave, a jarring symphony of violence. We were locked, his superior strength pushing me back toward the cold, unforgiving wall, my muscles straining. Across the room, Mark slammed Lucas's head into the rough stone floor, a sickening thud. Lucas was dazed, bleeding, his golden hair matted with grime, his eyes unfocused. Mark rose, ready to finish it, a lethal intent in his posture, every line of his body promising death. But his eyes caught my struggle for a split second. His attention, his unbreakable focus, was divided, a fatal error. It was the opening Lucas needed. With a desperate snarl, he drew a hidden blade from his boot, its edge coated with a faint, shimmering paste. Wolfsbane. Not enough to kill, but enough to paralyze, to render a wolf helpless, a cruel, insidious poison. He lunged not at Mark, but at me. If the blade hit me, I would be helpless. He could drag me away, reclaim me, and Mark, forced to choose between me and the fight, would be vulnerable, his pack left exposed. Everything slowed down. I saw the blade coming, a glint of silver death, moving with agonizing slowness. I saw the crazed, triumphant look in Lucas's eyes, a promise of twisted victory, of my final defeat. I saw Mark turning, his face a mask of primal horror as he realized what was happening, powerless to stop it in time, his eyes wide with a silent scream. I knew what I had to do. I was not a damsel to be saved. I was not a prize to be won. I was a Luna of the Shadowfangs. I was a warrior. with a cry of pure, unadulterated rage, a sound that tore from my very core. I shoved all my strength into the guard I was fighting, sending him staggering back, disoriented, out of my way. Then, instead of dodging Lucas's attack, instead of retreating, I stepped into it, meeting him head-on. I met his lunge head-on. I let the wolf's bane lace blade sink into my non-vital shoulder, a searing, numbing agony spreading through my arm, blooming like poison, a chilling cold. The pain was excruciating, a white-hot fire, but the move was unexpected. It put me right inside his guard, too close for him to maneuver. He was too close to pull the blade out and strike again, trapped by his own attack. "You chose the wrong side, Helen," he hissed in my ear, his breath hot and ragged against my neck, filled with a desperate, self-serving victory. "No." I gasped, the world starting to go numb and blurry, the wolfsbane working its insidious magic, spreading through my veins. I looked him right in the eye, my gaze unwavering, a silent challenge, and with my good arm, the one still under my control, I drove my own dagger up and under his ribs, aiming for a non-fatal but incapacitating blow. "You did." He grunted, a strangled sound, his eyes wide with shock and pain, his body stiffening. He stumbled back, his own blood now staining his perfect, pristine uniform, spreading across his chest like an ugly stain, ruining his facade. Just then, the gauntlet's final horn blared through the forest, a long, piercing wail, signifying the end. Time was up. The two guards were subdued, disarmed, groaning on the floor. Lucas was clutching his side, bleeding, his arrogance finally shattered, his eyes vacant. I was slumped against the wall, my arm useless, numb from the wolfsbane, but my eyes were fixed on the Shadowfang flag, still hanging untouched, a triumphant symbol of our victory. We had won. Mark was at my side in an instant, his hands gentle, almost impossibly so, as he assessed the wound in my shoulder, his face a mask of terrible fury and profound concern, a mix of emotions warring in his eyes. "Helen, why?" he breathed, his voice rough with emotion, raw with terror, as he ripped a strip of cloth from his sleeve to make a pressure bandage, his fingers quick and sure. "Because," I said, my voice weak but steady, looking at the man I loved, the alpha I had chosen, the king of my chaotic, dangerous new world. "This is my war too." He looked from my wound, a testament to my sacrifice, to the defeated, bleeding form of Lucas, who was now being taken into custody by the Gauntlet officials, his humiliation complete. He looked at our victorious, blood-spattered pack, their faces grim but triumphant, ready to celebrate. Then he looked back at me, his stormy gray eyes filled with a love that was as fierce and untamed as any battle he had ever fought, a love that promised forever. He leaned down and pressed his forehead against mine, his scent, pine and storm, surrounding me, comforting me, wrapping me in his presence. "My war," he corrected softly, his voice thick with a pride and love that healed more than any potion ever could, a balm to my soul. "My mate, my queen." I had gone to him for vengeance. I had wanted to burn my old life to the ground. But in the ashes, amidst the destruction, I had found something far greater. I had found a new family, a new purpose. I had found my true mate. I had found myself. And together, we would build an empire from the embers of the world we had so beautifully destroyed, stronger than ever before.